I've already figured out who the greatest MotoGP riders of all time were, thanks to the power of democracy. But since then I've come to a realization. Human beings are flawed. We have biases. We like some riders more than others. You know what doesn't have biases? The cold, unfeeling facts of math, baby. Today, I'll be putting all of my biases to the side, and I'll be devising the perfect mathematical formula to figure out who the greatest MotoGP rider of all time is. In order to devise my perfect GOAT formula, I want to take 4 aspects of a rider's career into account that I believe determines what made them great. Their number of championships, how dominant they were, how influential they were for the sport's growth, and how long they raced. In order to determine how dominant a rider was across their career, I'll take the total number of race starts and multiply it by 2 times their winning percentage and their podium percentage. This will give us a measure of how dominant they were, and since the base number that will be multiplied by their dominance is how long they raced, riders who had a longer career will get a bit of a boost. This formula also places more emphasis on wins than podiums, which I feel is self-explanatory. Next, we need to figure out championships. Now, all world championships are impressive, but they are not valued the same. Premier class championships have historically always been considered more valuable than middleweight and lightweight championships. So, I needed to come up with a system of devising how many points each one would be worth. For this, I came up with Premier Class Championships, 500cc in MotoGP, being worth 50 points apiece. After that, Middleweight Championships, which I'm defining as 350cc, 250cc, and Moto2 Championships, are all worth 25 points apiece. Lightweight Championships, or 125cc, 80cc, 50cc, and Moto3, are all worth 13 points apiece. Meaning the second part of our formula will look like this. After we add all those together, we'll have our championship score. Finally, rider influence. The influence that a rider had on the progression and popularity of the sport is something that is truly impossible to quantify. Obviously, some riders had great influence in ways that were seen off the track and mostly mattered to other riders until they came to light years later for the fans. However, thanks to the powers of our overlords at Google, I have come up with an answer. We can take the sum of a rider's championship and dominance scores, and then multiply it by their Google multiplier, which is their number of Google search results divided by 1 million. Finally, at the end of the formula, I'll multiply a rider's score by 2 if they're a MotoGP legend. MotoGP Legends is the equivalent of MotoGP's Hall of Fame for other sports. It is given to riders who are considered to have exerted their influence and changed the sport, either by being dominant or by contributing in some other way. If a rider is determined to have contributed enough to become a MotoGP legend, their score will be boosted because of it. Alright, that looks like a pretty good formula. Now, let's figure out which riders we should include. I don't want to spend the next 3 months of my life putting every single rider in MotoGP history through this formula, so let's narrow it down to about 50. A good place to start is the aforementioned MotoGP legends. These are riders who have been determined to be some of the greatest of all time, and therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if the GOAT comes from in there. So, let's throw in all 38 MotoGP legends. After that, the list of riders with the most world championships can fill out the ranks. While world championships are not a 1-to-1 equivalent for greatness, riders who have been great will typically win world championships. In addition, I threw in a couple of other riders, such as Andrea Dovizioso and Loris Capirossi. I also threw in some current riders, to give us a good benchmark for how they stack up against the greats. Alright, here we go. I have the list right here. Let's see how this looks. Oh god, something went really wrong. Aleix Espargaro comes in last place, with a GOAT score of 18 points. This is a good reference for things to come. Unfortunately, the problems with this formula start to become apparent quickly, as Stefan Bradl is ranked above 2-time world champion Umberto Massetti. As we head up the list, we can start to see more problems. American rider Kevin Schwantz is ranked 36th of all time, 4 spots underneath Fabio Quartararo. Pecco Bagnaia nets a score of 862, 2 spots above Dani Pedrosa. Pedro Acosta beats them both, coming in 21st of all time as a MotoGP rookie. Hugh Anderson, a 4-time lightweight champion from New Zealand, comes in 10th place, and Walter Villa manages to come in 8th. Giacomo Agostini is way too low in 7th place. As we enter the top 5, the numbers start to get very big very fast. Angel Nieto comes in 5th with a score of 7,432. Above him we have Marc Marquez, the highest active rider on the list, Above that we come to Jorge Lorenzo, who finishes 3rd of all time with a whopping score of over 15,000. Valentino Rossi comes in 2nd with a score of 22,000. And according to our formula, the greatest MotoGP rider of all time with a score of 234,000 is Phil Reed. Hold on a moment. Okay, what went wrong? Well, it turns out that the Google multiplier may not have been the most accurate metric of all time. Phil Reed managed to score 10 times higher than his nearest competitor because his Google multiplier was 549. Now listen, Phil Reed is a great rider and I think he's underrated. However, I'd be willing to bet everything that I own that all 549 million of those results are not about the British motorcycle rider Phil Reed. So we have to scrap the Google multiplier. In addition, I realized that 2 times multiplier for being a MotoGP legend isn't fair to certain current riders. I decided to lower the multiplier of legend status to 1.25 times instead. This will still boost scores, but it won't unfairly punish riders who didn't make the legends category for one reason or another, or are still active. If you want to say I'm being biased towards Marc Marquez, I'm not. Blame the numbers. I don't make the rules, I just change the formula. Now, we can run everything back through the formula and see who came out as the true GOAT. Yep. Here's the list. Okay. This looks a lot more promising. Let's take a look at our benchmark riders, who are now providing a much more accurate example of what we should expect from this list. Aleix Espargaro still finishes with 18 points. With low winning and podium percentages and no world championships, his only credit here is his longevity, starting 327 races. That gives him a GOAT score of 18 points. Stefan Bradl's Moto2 title brings him up to 48 points. After a very successful lightweight and intermediate career, Pedro Acosta comes in at a much more reasonable 48th of all time, with 100 points. A surprisingly low entry on the list is Randy Mamola, finishing 45th of all time with 104 points. This is mostly due to his never winning a world title. Nicky Hayden is the opposite story. Even with a Premier Class World Championship, he still comes in 43rd due to his low winning percentage. Maverick Vinales finishes in 35th. His high podium percentage and Moto3 World Championship net him 140 points. Loris Capirossi is the highest finisher to never win a championship, finishing 33rd due to his sheer longevity. Kevin Schwantz still falls very far, finishing 28th. This highlights the major issue with math. Math can't tell how good a rider really was. All it can see is what they accomplished with their career. If a rider was very skilled but competed against other riders who were also very skilled, then the math doesn't know that. It can't tell you that Kevin Schwantz and Casey Stoner were some of the most skilled riders of all time. It can only tell you what they did with their skill. And unfortunately, competing in a competitive era, sometimes that just doesn't measure up. To highlight this, Casey Stoner finished in 17th, much lower than he places on almost any other all-time list. Moving up, we find Andrea Dovizioso, Alex Crivier, and Barry Sheene, before we reach the highest active rider not named Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia. Bagnaia finishes with a GOAT score of 262. Here's a fun fact, if he wins in 2024, he'll move up 2 spots in this list, passing Freddie Spencer and a surprisingly low Kenny Roberts. 9-time world champion Carlo Ubbiali finishes in 14th, just ahead of 4-time 250cc champion Max Biaggi. Jeff Duke takes 13th, followed by Danny Pedrosa in 12th with a GOAT score of 395. This is honestly much higher than I expected for Pedrosa. While he is undeniably one of the greatest riders of all time, I thought that his resume might not stack up in the eyes of the formula, but I'm glad to see him this high on the list. Just missing out on our top 10 is a rather surprising entry. Jim Redman, who normally doesn't get the all-time nod. The 4-time 350cc champion finished his career with a 33% win rate and a 72% podium rate, catapulting him up to 423 GOAT points. Eddie Lawson rounds out our top 10, finishing with 425 points. I was surprised to see John Surtees fall to 9th. He's a 7-time world champion and finished with the highest career winning percentage of all time, but his short career keeps him from capitalizing on those wins, finishing with 495 GOAT points. Phil Reed comes in 8th, a far cry from the greatest of all time. While his career achievements are less impressive than the riders just below him, he had a longer career, which helps him hold up the number 8 spot. Australian legend Mick Doohan comes in 7th, much lower than he usually would. His streak of dominance through the 90s helps him secure 566 GOAT points, but everyone above him has him beat in at least one numerical category. Coming in a tie for 5th place, we find Angel Nieto and Jorge Lorenzo. One is a 13-time world champion who coasts to that 210-point mark with his unmatched lightweight racing prowess, while the other makes use of an impressive record over an extensive career to secure his GOAT points. Coming in 4th, we have Marc Marquez. The 8-time world champion has one of the most impressive records in the modern era, and nets 655 points on the back of his 6 Premier Class championships and 33% winning percentage. If Marquez was inducted as a MotoGP legend today, he would have 819 points, which would put him in 3rd place. Unfortunately for the Spaniard, only riders who have retired from full-time racing can be named into the MotoGP Hall of Fame, leaving him in 4th place for now. Who would he be taking 3rd place from? Well, that honor goes to Mike the Bike Hailwood. I was surprised to see Hailwood so high on the list. While he does have 8 world championships, only 3 of them are in the Premier Class, and his career was much shorter than the rest of the top 5. Fortunately for the British rider, his 50% winning percentage helps bring him into the top 3, with 674 GOAT points. After Hailwood, we experience a massive jump to the top 2 spots. With 1,066 points, Valentino Rossi comes in 2nd place. With 9 championships and the most starts in MotoGP history, Rossi's impressive level of dominance through the 2000s keeps him near the top of our list. And while democracy may have named him the GOAT, math has someone else in mind. Giacomo Agostini takes the number 1 spot on our list. He has the most Premier Class titles, the most middleweight titles, the most titles period, the 3rd highest winning percentage of all time, and a top 10 podium percentage of all time. Ago's career was made to dominate this kind of list. His career accolades seem just impossible to match. He is the mathematical GOAT of MotoGP, with a score of 1,223 points. While this formula is good and it looks a little more like my list than the democratic list from last time, I do think that there are some notable problems with this list. Mainly, riders who had undeniable skill but didn't capitalize on it throughout their careers fall far too low. Casey Stoner and Kevin Schwantz being prime examples of this. Math can't watch races. It can't tell how good a rider was, how their riding style influenced their competitors, what they did to help push the sport forward in ways that are just intangible and go beyond championships or wins. Math isn't perfect. It doesn't take into account the human spirit and that drive to win, the things that make a competitor truly great. So remember, kids, math class doesn't matter and your teachers are liars.